What does walking over 30,000 steps a day actually do to your body? In this video, we're going to dive into the unexpected benefits of this level of high volume daily walking. When I started my fitness journey back in 2024, I was just wrapping up a daily course of walking over 10,000 steps a day, which I had actually started back in the second half of 2023. But once I became so comfortable with walking 10,000 steps nearly on autopilot, I graduated into walking over 20,000 steps for almost all of 2024. Every single day of that year from January 10th, 2024 up until now, I've walked over 20,000 steps. And now in 2026, I have further graduated once again into walking over 30,000 steps. So as someone who's walked over 10,000 steps a day, 20,000 steps, and now 30,000 steps, I can pretty cleanly, and through personal experience, of course, go through all of the things that happen to your body when you're walking at each of those step levels. But we're going to concentrate on 30,000 steps today. So the first thing you're going to immediately notice is that walking at 30,000 steps a day is going to be one of the best ways to maintain your current calorie deficit. And in fact, it's going to help prevent your fat loss progress from hitting a plateau sooner than you think. What usually happens is when you start losing fat, or when you start on your fat loss journey, which most people equate with weight loss. Weight loss is not the same thing as fat loss, right? When we're talking about weight loss, we're going to be losing both fat and muscle. So we want to always be prioritizing losing fat over just losing weight. We want to hold on to as much muscle as possible. Otherwise, we're just going to look soft and weak and pretty small by the end of our first calorie deficit, which I actually experienced back in 2024. I got down to all the way to 9.7% body fat, but I was smaller and skinnier than ever. And contrary to popular belief, I did not get a six-pack even at 9.7% body fat because I had lost a lot of muscle. So fat loss should always be your goal. So when you stick to walking 30,000 steps a day, you're going to be introducing a calorie deficit through just an insane level of activity. You can get a 500 calorie deficit from just your meals, right? Basically looking at your maintenance calories, subtracting 500 from that, so you're basically eating less or 500 calories less every single day. And now, when you pair that with a 30,000 step a day count, you're essentially, at least at the beginning of your 30,000 steps a day goal, you're going to be burning an additional anywhere from 650 to 700 calories. So now you're easily burning over 1,000 calories a day through a combination of food and 30,000 steps a day. But eventually you're going to hit a point when your body enters a phase known as metabolic adaptation, which happens when you're working out at the gym, which also happens when you're in a calorie deficit, which is just maintained by eating less food, essentially control starvation. And it even happens when you're walking at such an intense and highly insane level of steps. So if you decide to stick to 30,000 steps, eventually you're going to have to get a point where you progressively overload. You're progressively overloading in the gym, right? You're increasing reps every single week, and you're adding weight every couple of weeks, maybe every month. So do the same thing with steps as well. You want to gradually, progressively overload and increase the amount that you're walking, even at 30,000 steps. So that's going to be the first effect that you're going to immediately notice that happens to your body. You're going to prevent yourself from hitting a plateau, and that plateau will actually happen later on. The second thing that you're going to notice that happens to your body walking at over 30,000 steps a day is that you're going to absolutely hate sitting. In fact, walking at such a high level is going to automatically force you to prefer walking and or standing to do everything on a day-to-day basis. When I was walking only 10,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps a day is only 100 minutes of walking. For the remainder of the time, I was still doing a buttload of sitting, right? Literally a buttload of sitting. Because 100 minutes of walking or 10,000 steps is just, an hour and 40 minutes? So for maybe the rest of the 14 hours or so, 14 plus hours, I was still mostly sitting down. I was sitting down to eat my meals. I was sitting down to do my work. I was sitting down to do meetings, sitting down to do basically everything. I even owned a sofa at that time. I used to sit down and watch TV or play video games. So I was still pretty sedentary when you look at it. People who are walking 10,000 steps only a day are still people I would consider not attaining a very high activity level. These guys are still pretty sedentary. When I stepped it up to 20,000 steps, suddenly I was walking an additional 10,000 steps a day, so an additional hour and 40 minutes. So now I was walking at about 3 hours and 20 minutes, right? 180 minutes is 3 hours, plus an additional 20 minutes would be 3 hours and 20 minutes. So now 3 hours and 20 minutes. So now I was considerably less sedentary, but I was still sitting down to eat my meals. It wasn't until I crossed into the 30,000 steps a day territory that I suddenly started to walk even more and sit even less. In fact, I started to hate sitting down altogether. Now, and this is actually something that happened at the start of this year when I crossed into 30,000 steps a day comfortably, automatically, I started to walk around when eating my meals. Instead of taking my conference call sitting down, I was either standing up when I had my camera on, or I was also walking around while doing those meetings. Heck, when I used to visit my family back home, instead of sitting down to have conversations with them, they would be sitting down, of course, but I would still be walking around as I conversed with them. Of course, this would probably give most of those guys motion sickness, and they never mentioned anything to me. But they would, be considerably annoyed by the fact that I was walking around basically in circles while they were just sitting there trying to continue the conversation with me. But the point is, that amount of walking, 30,000 steps a day, or 300 minutes of walking, suddenly you're not as sedentary anymore. In fact, you're barely sedentary. Based on my experience, at that level of walking, there are very few activities that you will actually conduct while sitting down. And for me, it's just using the restroom, going to sleep, and driving my car. And I have to use my car to drive maybe, if there's a place that's over an hour away by a walk, then more than likely I'm gonna opt to drive. Otherwise, if I can fit in a 30-minute walk to go to a shop, like for example, when I was overseas in Brazil, I didn't need to even take an Uber, let alone rent a car from the airport. I would just walk to the grocery store, get all my shit, and then walk back to my Airbnb, because I knew a 30-minute walk was just 3,000 steps. And heck, I needed those 3,000 steps in order to hit my, at that time, 25,000 a day step goal. So you're going to start hating, absolutely detesting the idea of having to sit down, because while you're seated down, at the back of your mind you're thinking, these are precious steps that I'm wasting while I'm sitting on my ass. So that's going to be the second effect on your body, a second direct consequence of walking over 30,000 steps. So in terms of the third effect of walking every day at 30,000 steps, it's actually going to cause you to decrease the amount of exercises you do at the gym, namely leg exercises. Because you're already walking so much, you're doing quite a bit on your legs, especially your lower leg muscles. So now you don't necessarily have to dedicate a single day just for leg exercises, or do more than 2-3 exercises. In fact, I would argue that you only need to do one compound leg exercise 3 times a week. In fact, what I typically do is a total body workout comprised of 12 exercises, and only one of those exercises is chiefly concentrated on building more leg muscles. So I usually do either a leg press on the leg press machine, or I do a hack squat, right? Or on the hack squat machine. And back in the day when I was doing my total body workout at home, I would actually just do either a goblet squat, or I would just do a regular squat with 2 dumbbells. And that was it. That was the only leg exercise I needed to do. I didn't necessarily have to, especially going into the gym, do leg extensions or even leg curls or calf extensions or any of that crap. I just kept it bare bones simple to this day and stick to one compound leg exercise, because 30,000 steps a day, that's gonna do wonders for all of your leg muscles, particularly, as I mentioned, your lower leg muscles like your hamstrings, for example, and your calves, for your quadriceps, your glutes, etc., and even your posture, your overall posture. All of that is going to be taken care of by 30,000 steps a day. And of course, that single compound leg exercise that you decide to choose when going into the gym 3 days a week. So that could be the leg press or a squat. So compound leg exercises. So that's going to be the third effect on your body from walking over 30,000 steps a day. The fourth effect, and I might do more than 5, but it depends. I think I'm going to keep it to 5 after doing a video of 10 walking mistakes last time. This is something that I've seen people report in the subreddit that's dedicated to walking. So I'm not sure how many of you guys are on Reddit or even read stuff on Reddit, but sometimes I check in from time to time, and there's a subreddit which is, I think, r/walking, and they talk about the increased mental clarity that they get from becoming, or after becoming, daily walkers, or after committing to a routine of daily walking. That was certainly something that I noticed walking above 10,000 steps. That was something that was immediately noticeable. And in fact, once I crossed over 20,000 steps, I did not experience any more brain fog, let alone effects of depression or anxiety. But it wasn't until I crossed into 30,000 steps that depression and anxiety doesn't even exist in my vocabulary. I don't even remember how it was to feel depressed and anxious. And I've been someone who's been living alone for the past 3 years, right? I've been taking care of myself for a while now. And frankly, I feel good, right? No remorse, no bad feelings towards anyone, no regrets about past decisions, none of that stuff. Everything in life now is just a life lesson. Everything that happens, good or bad, is just a lesson to be learned. That's my approach. I have a completely glass half full approach to life now, and that's in large part thanks to daily walking, and especially walking over 30,000 steps. It's also really good for decreasing brain fog. Brain fog happens a lot, especially when you pair being uber sedentary and eating lots of ultra processed, crappy ass food, particularly shit that you order from Uber Eats, DoorDash, or any of those delivery services. And in fact, when I started living by myself, and this was back when I was still in Florida, I used to order almost all of my afternoon meals, like lunch and dinner in particular, from places like Tropical Smoothie Cafe, or I would like go into the Publix and get like one of those subs, those chicken tender subs, or just get like a rotisserie chicken. All of that shit is processed at the end of the day. If you're not cooking it yourself, you have no idea exactly what are the ingredients in your food. You don't know exactly how to accurately track the calories for all of that shit that you're shoveling down your gullet. So that was actually causing me a lot of brain fog, in addition to walking less than 10,000 steps. This is still like 2023, the first half of 2023. And in fact, it wasn't until the second half of 2023 that I finally said screw it and started walking over 10,000 steps, and I started cooking all my food. Then the mental clarity that I experienced was just revolutionary. It was something that I never would have even dreamed of, right? When I fixed my diet plan and when I committed to walking a shit ton of steps every single day, that's when I truly felt like I could concentrate, that I could leave my worries behind and just be positive all the time, right? Not just using, empty words, but actually feeling positive, actually looking forward to getting up every morning. So increase mental clarity, reduce brain fog, and completely eliminating all types or all forms of depression and anxiety from your life is another huge consequence of walking over 30,000 steps. So that's a mental benefit, not necessarily a physical benefit of walking over 30,000 steps. And then the last benefit, or the last effect, but this is a benefit, let's call it a benefit. The last benefit of walking over 30,000 steps is that it completely eliminated all of my food cravings and all of the food noise that I was constantly dealing with on a day-to-day basis prior to adopting this intense regimen of high volume daily walking. This alone is probably going to be the most important factor for maintaining your calorie deficit and keeping you lean year-round. In fact, this is probably one of the major reasons for why most people are jumping on the GLP-1 bandwagon, right? They can't deal with those cravings. They can't deal with the food noise, right? Frankly, people, and it's sad that people have to turn to things, all of these, medications that were previously prescribed for diabetes, right? These GLP-1 drugs like Wegovy, Ozempic, now they got Retta, which is not even FDA approved. But people are using this to kind of ward off those food cravings when they could just stick to walking over 20,000 and eventually walking over 30,000 steps. It's not going to happen overnight, but sure as hell it's not going to require any out-of-pocket payments, and it's definitely not associated with any horrific side effects, right? There were actually stories and accounts, not sure how many of those are really accurate, but people are actually going blind from being on Ozempic. That didn't happen in most of the cases, but a couple of cases of sudden onset blindness is enough to make you, scratch your head and worry a little bit. But food cravings and food noise automatically disappeared from my life. One other thing I did was I actually went ahead and deleted those food delivery apps that I had on my phone, like Uber Eats, DoorDash. They used to have something called Grubhub back in the day, back in the early 2020s. So I got rid of all of that crap, started preparing all my foods at home, and walking to do every single thing, right? Fitting in those walking windows every single day. Instead of sitting to do most of my activities, now I was walking around. Every activity was an opportunity to rack up more steps. As a result, my mind was so fixated on my fitness goals, basically hitting my protein and macros and my calories, hitting my daily step count, and making sure I made it to the gym, or at least I completed a total body workout where I worked on all 6 muscle groups. Those 3 constituents of staying lean forever, for life, for year-round, were enough to completely obliterate my food cravings and food noise. And now I have no need to spring for dessert. I don't have a sweet tooth anymore. I don't care what's the latest trend this summer around desserts and fast food, whatever, promotions, buffets, any of that crap. I'm quite content with preparing all my meals on my own and continuing to be, at this point, in a maintenance, right? I'm eating at maintenance calories, which for me, at 30,000 steps a day and working out 3 days a week, is 2,500 calories. And I've been posting updates on my maintenance calorie consumption as part of my community post, so I'm posting an update on that in addition to my 30,000 step a day streak, which is now 12 days and counting. In fact, I think I might be nearing that right now. Let's see what the Apple Health app says. So yeah, I am well above 26,000 steps at the moment. 26,375. So with dinner still left to be prepared, eaten, and then I have to take my doggies out after dinner, I am in basically shouting distance, if not even closer, to crossing 32,000 steps once again for the 13th day in a row, but fingers crossed. So, various awesome effects from walking over 30,000, in my case 32,000, but for most of you guys, just get started today, right? Whatever is your current step count, double it. Get to 10,000 steps, walk at least 10,000 steps every single day for 6 months, and then start gradually building up to 20,000 steps. And then maybe within a year and a half to 2 years, you'll be right where I am today, which is walking over 30,000 steps every single day to stay lean for life.